Hi. Welcome to the Selectmen meeting of January 18th, 2022. We're meeting at 4 today to give our candidates for town manager position, possibly our finalists, some time to answer questions in a duly fashion and not a hurried environment. So Mrs. Cavaco, if you will.
In accordance with Section 2475 and pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner. Tune into PAC TV government cable access channels Comcast 15 or Verizon 47 and watch the meeting as it is aired live. Or watch the meeting live through PAC TV's website at pactv.org. Members of the public who wish to participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner. Contact the Select Board's Assistant, Chris Badeau, who is available prior to and throughout the meeting to provide public remote access via the public call-in line, which is 508-322-3383, or email cbadeau@plymouth-ma.gov. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so for reasons of economic hardship, and despite best efforts, we will post on the town's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting.
Thank you, Mrs. Cavaco. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bernie Lynch, and he's going to tell us a quick walkthrough what we're going to do. And I believe that Bernie's going to ask most of the questions that we sent in already, and then we might have some follow-ups or adds to that as we go along.
All right, thank you, Chair. The process that we're going to use is essentially the same that we've used in many of our communities that we work with. The goal here is to have this be a dialogue between the candidates and the board to get a feel for who they are, what their skills are, and how they relate to you as board members, and then how you would anticipate they would relate to others as well, based upon the dialogue that we have with them. I provided you with a number of sort of prompt questions that we would use. Some of those we may skip over a little bit, but a number of you have sent me some questions that sort of focus in on some areas within those topics that I will use to have this dialogue with the candidates. But I don't want this to be just me asking the questions. I prefer it not to be that. I really prefer that as we go through this, as they're answering the questions, that if they say something that isn't entirely clear to you, or you want more information, or you feel that they've missed something that and that I haven't caught on to as they're answering the questions, the goal here is for you to jump in and have that discussion, that dialogue with them. So that's the process that we're using. We've blocked them out at 4:15, 5:30, and 6:45 with Derek Brindisi, Jen Callahan, and Jennifer Phillips in that order. But I've instructed all of the candidates to come in a little bit early in case we get through the questions a little bit faster, and then they'll be ready to go so that we don't have a lot of downtime. Again, I can't stress enough that it's hopefully going to be a dialogue that you have with the candidates, and happy to take any feedback that you have now. And Chris Badeau and I have corresponded earlier today regarding the process. The candidates will be kept in the waiting room, the Zoom waiting room, that until we're ready for them. And then he will let them in based upon the board's availability. But happy to take questions or comments at this point, anything that you want to add on to what I've provided.
Anybody have questions of Bernie?
I do. Just a quick question. Can the other candidates, I know that at one point we had enabled the waiting room to be able to hear the meetings. I just wanted to be sure that they
Oh.
cannot hear the meeting.
Chris?
Yes.
Yes, they.
Which one?
Yes, they can or yes, they can't.
So yeah, they cannot hear the meeting if they're in the waiting room, but
Good.
if they're live streaming, they could. I don't know if you asked them not to do that.
I did ask them not to do that, so.
Okay. Yep. Nope. So if they're in the waiting room, they won't be able to hear the meeting.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Good. All right. Is our first candidate here by any chance, Chris?
Yes, he is. Would you like him in?
Well, let's see if the board has any other questions or comments.
Okay.
Anything? Anybody?
No,
All right.
All set.
Well, Chris, I think we're ready.
Here he comes.
Good afternoon, Derek. I don't think we can hear you.
Yeah, muted,
I
Derek.
think.
How's that?
That is much better. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And I will let, and I didn't mention this before, Mr. Chair, but if maybe everyone could introduce themselves. Derek may know some or all of you, but perhaps to start off with that way, and then we'll get into the questions.
Ladies before gentlemen.
Mhm. Hi, Derek. I am Betty Cavaco, and I am in my 5th year of serving as a select board member.
Pat,
Hi, Derek. Patrick Flaherty here.
Harry,
Hi, Derek. Harry Helm. You may remember me from the Advisory and Finance Committee, but now I'm on the Select Board. I was elected this past May.
Charlie,
Hey, Derek, how are you? Charlie Bletzer. I was elected in a special election August 14th. I just got, so I'm the newbie on the board. Nice to meet you.
hi Derek, I'm Dick Quinto, Chairman of the Board of Select Board, as they call it now. And I'm going into my 2nd year. I've served previous years, well over 10, so. Anyway, I thought I'd come back and try it a little bit.
It was so much fun, right? So,
More.
well, Derek, why don't you, the board has had an opportunity to see your resume, and obviously they know, you served some time in Plymouth, so they know a little bit about you. Maybe if you could just talk to the board a little bit about your background, but most importantly, why are you interested in the town of Plymouth and this position?
Sure, great. And thank you, everyone, for having me and allowing me to be a finalist here this afternoon. So as my resume indicates, I'll just go back on my experience. I had the opportunity to work for the city of Worcester for about 15 years. I was appointed at an early age 30 years old to be the Director of Health Administration. And I'll talk more about it, but I led that department through a very challenging time and had the opportunity to rebuild it to be the first accredited department in Massachusetts. From that point forward, I wanted to really kind of change my trajectory in municipal government, knowing that I didn't want to leave municipal government, but what other opportunities presented themselves. And I then, as you know, had the opportunity to serve as the assistant town manager in Plymouth from 2015 to 2017, where I was able to build many relationships, not only with the town board of selectmen members, but many of the department heads that continue to serve the community today, and many of the frontline staff as well. And so I always took away from that experience with a love for the town of Plymouth and hope that someday I could return. But when an opportunity presented itself in 2017 with the town of Upton, I thought it was best to move my career to be the town manager instead of the assistant town manager. And I remember during that time that there were certain skill sets that I really wanted to sharpen. And as the town manager in Upton, as you can imagine, it's a smaller community, $25 million budget. And many of the things that we have to do, whether it's through statutes or local bylaws, we don't have the bandwidth as far as staffing. So many of those responsibilities, such as procurement, human resources, developing the annual budget, all fall on the shoulders of the town manager in this type of community. So I had, I appreciate having served in Upton for almost 5 years now, because I was really able to really hone my skills. So moving to a larger community, if I were chosen, I feel that I have the experience to really sit down and probe questions. So meet the finance director and probe certain specific questions around town finances and the things that we do because of that experience. And then, as you know from my resume, I've been serving almost 17 years in the Air National Guard. I'm stationed at the Pease Air National Guard base, which is right outside Portsmouth, another seaport community. And I'm currently serving as a Lieutenant Colonel at the 157th Medical Group. I served also 5 years now running as an adjunct faculty member at Worcester State University. And as you can see, I am a credentialed manager through ICMA. I am one of only 24 credential managers in all of Massachusetts. So that's kind of like, my background of who I am and what brought me here today. But, why do I want to come to Plymouth? Well, really the answer is I want to come back to Plymouth. The vacancy, this is a well thought of position across Massachusetts, and it would allow a person like myself to kind of be at the pinnacle of a career. And the time that I served there, I'll be honest with you, I had never gone to Plymouth until the day I started working, or actually the day I interviewed back in 2015. But in that 2-year period, I really fell in love with the community. I had the opportunity to live in the Manamint area, so I lived very close to the beach. And again, that 2 years for me was extremely important. And so I do believe, given my past experience in Plymouth and my present experience in Upton, I would be an ideal candidate because I could really hit the ground running right away, given the fact that I know many of the staff and I know many of the boards of committee members already. So, and I feel like my relationships with many of those folks in Plymouth continues today. And I would encourage you to talk to others, whether they be department heads or other folks in the community, to learn more about how I interacted with them 5 years ago.
Okay, Derek. Before we go much further, there seems to be a little bit of an audio problem, and I know that a couple members have noted that to me. Is there a way that we can improve the audio coming out of your computer there? Do you know?
Well, I'll just try to put earbuds in. Maybe that'll help.
Okay. Zoom is wonderful, and it has its limitations too. So
I'll do it. Yeah. Hopefully this will work. Just give me a second.
sure, not a problem.
Actually, I brought these as a backup because you just never know.
Yep, not a problem at all. Thank you.
Okay, let me know if that's any better.
Is that, board members, is that better? Yeah, that is better. Thank you.
Okay. I
So-
apologize.
Great. Thank you very much. I can't believe that you hadn't been to Plymouth until you started. You never went to see Plymouth Rock when you were a high school student or a grade school student, or?
No, they would take us to the Boston Aquarium. That was our annual trip as a grade schooler. So no, I honestly had never been to Plymouth at all. In fact, I remember when I went there, I honestly thought I was going to a small seaside community, and then quickly did I realize that Plymouth is extremely complex. The fourth largest road network in Massachusetts, the largest geographic area. So Plymouth presents its challenges. I would always say when I came back to the Upton area that when I think of Plymouth, I think of It has its urban issues, right? So the urban core issues, it's got suburban issues, and it's got many rural issues as well. So, from a management perspective, you really have to be fluid to understand the different dynamics in the neighborhoods in which you're trying to resolve problems in, because they're all so different.
Okay, great observation. Let's talk about your, you've had an opportunity in Upton, certainly, and you in Worcester, you served a key role within the overall organization, and obviously your military background. Talk to us about your leadership style, and if you could, cite some examples of how you would lead a team. And then I have some follow-up questions probably that a couple board members asked me to sort of fill in if you hadn't hit them. But talk to us about how you would lead the organization. What would that look like?
Sure. So I guess I would just, if I had to choose two words, I would say first collaborative and two strategic. So, I pride myself on being a collaborative leader. And what I mean by that is I really engage folks at all different levels. And so certainly it's easy to say that having conversations with department heads to resolve issues that are at that level is important. But it's also just as important, and what I've learned over the last 7 years is that engaging the community in a collaborative manner is just as important, because oftentimes you will get the answer you're looking for by engaging the community and boards and committee members. And so, as we have conversations with boards and committee members, understanding their perspective, we all look at issues with a different lens and trying to understand where those issues are stemming from and how to resolve is super important. One thing that I can, as I say, as a collaborative, talk about more about collaborative leader style. I've had the opportunity on multiple occasions through various leadership courses is to go through the Myers-Briggs. I don't know if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs or 4 lenses. So 4 lenses is a type of Myers-Briggs. And what you learn from those analytical projects is that people think about issues differently. And that's a good thing. And so what I take back from that is not to put, just because I'm in disagreement with somebody, I try to understand based upon, how they're wired, that why are they looking at the issue that different way? And so that helps me be a better leader in trying to get to the root cause of some of the issues. So I would say first I'm a collaborative leader. And again, I think that my reputation in Plymouth would certainly speak to that, and certainly my reputation in Upton speaks to that. But the last piece I would say is I definitely would define myself as a strategic thinker. So I had an opportunity. So I've always been, I've always gone about my business, thinking about strategic thinking, even back to my Worcester days when we engage 150 folks in the community. And 100 different businesses really developed a strategic plan for the health of Worcester. But then that took me a little bit further. I had the opportunity back in 2015. I was selected amongst 2 or 3 other members at the base to go to the Army War College for about a week. And so we're sitting in this room. There's probably about 50 of us from around the nation sitting, and we're just learning about strategic planning. And so normally when we talk about strategic planning at the local level, we're thinking 5 years, maybe 10 years, depending on the issue. But we were talking about strategic planning 50 years out in the Army War College. And it really demonstrated how small and how focused our strategic thinking can be, when sometimes we really have to take not the 40,000 foot level, but even the 80,000 foot level to really look across spectrums and try to understand the issues and try to develop long-term plans in order to get at those issues. So it's great to say, where does Plymouth want to be in 2025? I would argue it's where does Plymouth want to be in 2030 or 2035? Because we got to start setting the foundation today if we want to get there tomorrow.
Okay. Along those lines, that's probably a great lead in regarding the notion of transitions that happen in local government. There's certainly a sense that the town is going through a major transition in its structure and its style. Certainly the Plymouth of 2022 is different than the Plymouth of 2000. And as you look forward into the 2030s, 2040s, it's going to be vastly different. Can you tell us your experience in leading an organization through change? You've
Sure.
given some great examples there of how you've sort of started to think about change within an organization and an organizational culture. But can you describe your experience in leading an organization through change?
Yeah, so I'll try to touch on a few different examples, starting in Worcester, and I started to talk about it in my opener. When the city manager had come to me, this was the 9 seat cuts of 2009. I'm sure you remember those, Bernie. And there were, Worcester laid off probably 150 people during the 9 seat cuts, and I was, working in a department that all but 4 of us were laid off. And the city manager came to me and he said, listen, I want you to reconstruct this department. I want it to be community engaged. I want it to be data driven. Oh, and by the way, I'm not giving you any money to do this. And so, again, I was 30 years old and I was really trying to think, how am I going to do this? And so what we started to do is we really started to engage community. We engaged in universities for assistance to help give us some bandwidth. And then I started having conversations with the 6 area town managers about regionalizing services. And so we, actually it was 15 in the beginning. We ended up establishing intermunicipal agreements with 6 of the neighboring communities. And so what we did during that time is we created a regional department that 6 other municipalities were relying on. So those IMAs then contributed to 25% of our resources for the department. We will grant, at a very early time, we will bring in this very small department $6 million annually in grants, which contributed to about 50% of our operating costs. And then the last 25% came from the city alone. So we were able to diversify our revenue streams so that in the future we would be resilient to the economy, or poor economy is what I should say. And so by the time I left that department, it was 25 FTEs. So we went from 4 FTEs to 25 FTEs. And as I mentioned earlier, that department became the first accredited department in all of Massachusetts. It outpaced Boston and it outpaced the city of Cambridge as well. And it ended up becoming a national model to regionalizing services. So that was one of my first forays in leading change. And my other big one was when I came here to the town of Upton. It was a similar situation where the Board of Selectmen, they were looking for change. They no longer accepted status quo. And I remember saying to them during my interview, listen, if you want status quo, please don't call me back, because that's not what I do. My everything I've done in the career is to move a organization in a different direction and hopefully in a positive direction. So when I came here, we had low morale among staff. There was no vision for commercial growth in the town, and so over time we were able to work on that. I wrote a grant. We received a grant from the state to develop an economic development plan. We then went ahead. We had a contractor to help us by setting a vision for the town center and try to expand commercial growth opportunities in the town center. There was a 20+ year conversation about rebuilding a new library. I was able to get the different constituencies together and not build a new library, but design a community center, which will house a library in the senior center. We just broke ground on that less than 3 weeks ago. That building will We'll hope to cut a ribbon on that in 12 months from today. So these are the different examples that I can use, or positive examples and achievements that I've been able to accomplish during my career with trying to move an organization through change.
How would you go about looking at the Plymouth structure? You know, obviously you're familiar with the Plymouth organizational structure. How would you go about looking to reorganize? What would be your the criteria by which you would propose any reorganizations?
So first, I would say in Upton, I went through 2 reorganizations, but the first thing I did is not do anything. So I really wanted to get a sense of how the departments were operating. I wanted to talk to the staff. Certainly, I wanted to talk to the elected body to hear from them, because they've been closer to it than I have. And then during that period of time, the first reorganization that I implemented in Upton was creating a finance department. Now, I know Plymouth already has a finance department, but that wasn't the case in Upton. We had a board of assessors, we had a town accountant, we had a treasurer collector's office that were all separate and distinct organizations. And so through time, it was my goal to bring them all under one roof for efficiency purposes, for personnel purposes, to support one another. Because again, these are really one-man operations for the most part. And so when a person's on vacation, that office would shut down. And then ultimately create a finance director position that would provide supervision and oversight to that department. So that was one reorganization. And then most recently, this past fall, the fire department in Upton has gone through multiple fire chiefs in the last couple of years since I started. And one thing that I do, and I try to do often, is try to find the individuals within the organization that excel, people that I can depend on, individuals that if I ask for a task to get done, I don't have to follow up because they'll typically get back to me before I even have to ask the question the second time. And we have individuals like that here in Upton. And so because we have that level of professionalism and expertise, I was able to think way outside of the box and create what we have is now in a public safety department. So what I did is I went to the police chief, who is that professional. He has led his police department through multiple accreditations and re-accreditations. You know, he is the utmost of a professional. He actually is the president of the Mass Chiefs Association this year. And I went to him and I said, Chief, this is what I'm thinking. Given what you do to this community and the folks that are willing to follow you, I'm asking you if you'd be willing to take on a leadership role in what will be a newly formed public safety department, which it will be the police department, the fire department, and emergency management division, all under your leadership. He happily acknowledged it, and we worked out the structure in which we could operationalize that, and that continues. Again, it's new. We just started it in August of this past year, but I can tell you when we had a bond rating call with S&P, and for some reason, this question about reorganizing the public safety department came up, and I was asked a question: where did you get that from? Where did you do your research on that? And I had my response was, well, we did a lot of lit reviews, and we looked at best practices across the nation, not just in the Northeast, and that's how we came to this conclusion. And S&P, I'll be honest with you, they had said that our response was something that they would expect out of the city of New York, with how we did the lit reviews and how we went across state lines to find what we think is the best and brightest ideas that are out there. So those are two of my most recent organizations that I had a heavy hand in.
Okay, great. One more question along these lines of this sort of ties to this. What do you see as the greatest threats to local government, both maybe give us one short-term threat to local government and one long-term threat.
Okay, that's a good question. So, when I look at, let me start with the long-term threat first, even though I do think these threats are interwoven. So about 2 years ago, I sat down with our department heads and we did a SWOT analysis. I think you all know what a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so we talked about, because I really wanted to start to forecast where our departments needed to be in the next 5 years. And the most common theme that came from all the department heads as far as threats was our human resources. We have struggled with finding professional municipal employees to be the next in line to be our future leaders. And that's a significant problem, I would say, not just locally, but I would say it probably transcends to every municipality, certainly in Massachusetts, probably across the nation. The fact that we're starting to see a high turnover in local government, both in retirements and maybe some folks moving on to the private sector, and we don't have the ability to retain them. Or we don't have the ability to replace them, which is even more of a concern. So long-term succession planning, I think, is of paramount importance for every municipality. And so the short-term threat, I hope isn't on the horizon, but I have a feeling that it could be out there, is an impending recession in late 2022. So I try to do the best that I can in between my jobs, is to try to read up on what's going on, global with the global market. And what I've started to learn is that Germany is already heading towards a recession. So they've already had the last quarter, they had a dip in their GDP. Definition of a recession is 2 consecutive decreasing quarters would put that nation into recession. And Europe as a whole relies on Germany's market. And so this calls into question, what could happen in Germany, in 6 to 12 months from now. In addition to that, throughout this nation, we still, at the end of 2021, we have still had 10 million job vacancies that are out there, which has led to supply chain problems, which has led to inflation problems, and so on and so forth. So all of these variables, to me, should be cause for concern. The Federal Reserve has already stated that they plan on going up on interest rates in 2022. Some have suggested up to 4 times as a strategy to control inflation. So I know that we'll talk about the state's surplus and how well Massachusetts has done as a whole. And maybe, some of that money will trickle down to us at the local level with Chapter 90 or other things. But, I would not be clouded by the state's economy and leaning a little bit more forward to say, let's be cautious as we head into 2022, because there's a lot of other flags that are out there that concern.
Okay, great. I'm going to have some questions to tie to that probably in a second, but I wanted to give the board an opportunity, if there's anything in this category of management, you hit upon economic development, which I want to get back to as well, but and the finances, which I want to speak to, but in terms of management style, leadership style, any board questions that people want to ask at this point? All right. You've put out your crystal ball, and you've shown that there might be some clouds on the horizon regarding the economy. Let's talk about how you would manage the finances of the town of Plymouth. What do you see as what would be your approach to what has been your approach in Upton? What would be your approach to managing finances in the town of Plymouth?
So certainly, I want to sit down with the finance team and dive deep into everything that's happening with the the current state of condition of the town. I want to learn more about the fluctuating excess levy capacity, which I've noticed. I see free cash was certified at $20 million. The tax rate seems like it's stable, although that's always something I think that we need to talk a little bit about. The commercial industrial growth is, again, stuck at 12%. So I kind of want to learn more about all that. But what I can say is that, again, I'm the type of person that lands on plans and tries to not be a mile wide and inch deep. What do I mean by that? So like, we can do a lot of things for the community, but if we're only an inch deep, we're really not gaining any progress. So, to try to narrow our focus and not do so many things so that we can be making progress in certain areas, I think is super important. And one thing I've done in Upton is I worked with the finance committee to develop a financial policy. This is about 3 or 4 years ago. It was then adopted by the Board of Selectmen soon after. When I came to town, we were certifying free cash at about 2% of our operating budget. Right now, our free cash, the last 3 years, has been certified at 10% of our operating budget. Our stabilization account was less than 5%. DLS said best practices, stabilization account should be at least 10% of your operating budget. So in this case, we'd be looking at approximately $26 million for the town of Plymouth. I believe that stabilization, I think, is about 13 million, so it's about 5%. So I'd want to work with the departments first, and then start to have these conversations with the finance committee, the board, and the select board, to start to determine what financial position do we want to be in the next 5 years. I can tell you that our general stabilization is at our 10% mark based upon the policy that we created a few years back in Upton. And so because of that financial planning, I can tell you with absolute certainty that the town of Upton is in a very strong financial position as long as they continue to maintain this policy for years to come.
Okay. So have you hit 10% in Upton?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Our general stabilization at 10%, and we're certifying at about 9% every year in our free cash, which is high.
Yeah.
We definitely could throttle it back if we needed to, but again, that's strong budgeting. So as you know, free cash comes from a couple different areas. Obviously, it comes from New Grove, comes from turnbacks and local receipts. But we've been able over time to build that up to get to the 10% mark. And then the other thing I didn't mention when we think about finances, we worked with Department of Local Services. This is pre-COVID. We sat down with them and we went through this five-year financial forecasting model. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And so we actually can project out, again, this is pre-COVID, so things have definitely changed. But the whole idea was that we were going to project out our expenses and our operating budget over the next 5 years so that we're more predictable in where we need to be. And if there's opportunities in there for new initiatives, we could then fit those in.
Okay. All right. Did DLS did that for you?
Yes, that was, we worked with DLS on that. That was the fall, right before COVID. So that 5-year forecasting kind of is out the window given everything that's happened with COVID. But at some point when things stabilize, we definitely would get back to that so that, again, we can be more predictable in the things that we do year after year.
Okay. Have you had DLS do a financial management review for you?
Financial management review, prior to myself getting here, the former town manager, they had received a grant for the community compact to do the financial review. And they actually they had established financial policies for the day-to-day operations of finances. What I had done different is I then came in and then set a financial reserve policy. And honestly, I stole a book from the city of Worcester's page where we would then appropriate a certain percentage of our free cash every year towards general stabilization towards capital improvement. So this way, by having this policy, we know exactly each and every year what percentage of money we were going to put towards into the general stabilization account, into capital improvement. So then it took away the guesswork and it took away the politics of trying to move money back and forth into different accounts.
Okay. One more question on finance, and when I asked about the long-term threat to local government, many people would probably point to the OPEB issue. What's been your experience in handling OPEB, the unfunded OPEB liabilities in Upton, and how would you go about dealing with it in Plymouth?
Right. So again, this is a question that every municipality is grappling with, probably all but one in Massachusetts. So we have like every other community, we have an OPEB trust fund, and every year we commit $100,000 through the tax levy into the trust fund, and so we continue to do that. But I think that what I wanted to do is be a little bit more strategic around OPEB liability. And the first year that I came to town, I had to negotiate with the 4 unions, the successor agreements. And what I have proposed, and what I got a commitment from all 4 unions, is that effective on the first day of our contract, all new employees would contribute 2% of their base wages into the OPEB trust fund. From what I have gathered, Upton was the first community in central Massachusetts that was able to get the bargaining units to agree to helping curb the OPEB liability. So that's what we do now, and because of that, again, we're contributing $100,000 to the tax levy, and when it's all said and done, over time, over turnover, we'll be contributing approximately another $120,000 just through employee contributions as well. So that's kind of the short of how we're going to try to slow down the growing OPEB liability. But long term, I think that we all can agree that it's really not going to be addressed until our pension liabilities are fully funded. In Upton, our pension liabilities are pace to be fully funded in 2034, and we've made a commitment that we would flip those contributions from the retirement system over to OPEB at that point, and really start to make some serious headway. From my research, it appears that Plymouth's OPEB liability is north of $900 million.
Right.
So certainly there's a long way to go. But I think, again, from what I just outlined, I think there's some things that we can potentially do in the short term just to try to mitigate that.
Okay.
For future references.
Financial management questions, anybody? Patrick?
I know, Derek, the last 2 years for municipal planning has been kind of brave new world for everyone. And I'm curious with, COVID as a major factor to the planning process and sort of the uncertainties that I'm sure every town faced. What was, one of the most difficult decisions that you had to work through? Maybe it's financial or maybe it was something else in the last 2 years specifically, that was maybe something new that you hadn't come across before in your experience?
Let me start by saying that financially, the town was in strong condition to weather any decreases in revenue. So whether those be state revenue dollars that may have potentially been decreased, or even local tax dollars. So we put ourselves in a position again by filling up our general stabilization account and having strong free cash reserves in order to weather that. So to be honest with you, I was less worried about laying off staff. In fact, my commitment early on in the COVID was we will do everything we can to keep our staff employed. When I came here 5 years ago, we had low morale amongst our staff. And we had worked so hard to rebuild those relationships with our staff that I want to ensure that they knew that I was in their corner to do everything to help them. But I think what I struggled with the most early in the COVID experience was just the intensity of which everything was changing. And whether it was CDC guidance, state guidance, the local board of health, and even the community pressures. Again, we were dealing with uncertainty at the time. And I would say we were getting more phone calls from the community on what they think is appropriate measures than I was getting from some of our boards and committees. And so I have to be honest, early on, that was a high stress moment for me, just to try to balance all of that. And then again, not having a human resources department, having to be the chief author, working with, with my HR assistant on what are we going to do to protect our workforce, and what do we need to do to return them back to work, and having proper PPE in place. And so those are honestly, those are my major challenges that we had to work through. And I felt like once we got through those, things started to settle down. We started to go, we took this as an opportunity to become more electronic and more resilient to future issues. For example, we had the opportunity to use CARES Act dollars to acquire a very smart online permitting software program for our code department and our fire department, and that continues today. The staff love it. They can work from home, even in the environment we're dealing with now with Omicron. We could easily turn the lights out at town hall and go work from home. All our staff has laptops and continue to maintain the continuity of government that folks understood and wanted, pre-COVID. I hope that answers your question.
Derek, let's move into economic development. In talking about the town's finances, and you had some good discussion of some financial strategies, financial policies, financial sort of best practices there. And oftentimes many communities look at economic development as the way that they're going to sort of grow their way out of any financial strains that without burdening the residential taxpayer. What do you what has been your experience in economic development, and what do you feel is the role of the town manager in promoting commercial development within a community? And your experiences in that area would be great.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what is the role of the town manager? I can tell you what the role was in Upton for economic development. This is one of the questions that was asked, that was posed to me 5 years ago. The town of Upton wanted to maintain its rural character, but at the same time, they wanted commercial growth, commercial industry to expand in town. And so therein lies the conflict, right? So how do you maintain the character in the community, but at the same time, developing the community, right? So, I really became focused, not at the community at large, but looking at areas of opportunity. And the first area of opportunity that I had seen, and this was, I found it during my research, and then I found it, when I met with board members walking on Main Street. It was our town center. Our town center, in my opinion, was underutilized. We had dilapidated buildings, vacant lots that were former oil companies that used to operate under. And I looked at it, and then there was a church that was left vacant for about 10 years. And to me, those weren't blight. Those parcels weren't blight, but they were areas of opportunity. And so, to get to one of your responses, let's focus, when we think about coaching, let's focus on the areas that have already been developed but are being underutilized, right? And so if folks in the community don't want to rise up and and be a part of that conversation. So the town manager can at least set the course and set the vision, working with that economic development committee, which we didn't have in Upton prior to my existence. In fact, I encouraged the board of selectmen to appoint an economic development committee so I could work one-on-one with community members on the downtown redevelopment. So that is what our focus is. We ended up, I mentioned earlier, we hired a consultant to help us go through a visioning process for the redevelopment of the town center and to expand commercial growth opportunities. It's slow going. The pandemic certainly didn't help us, but even during the pandemic, we were able to cite two businesses cited and just have opened up in town in the last year and a half. A local brewery came to town, and then a local flower shop had come into the town center. At this point right now, I'm still working with the Economic Development Committee. We're going to issue an RFP. The town has acquired three out of the 4 key parcels in the town center that we are slating for a mixed-use development project. And part of that is just engaging real estate developers, but real estate agents as well. Many of the leads that I have had came from real estate agents who have called me and said, hey, I have a client who's looking for this. What do you have in town? We opened up a marijuana shop in our C&I district 2 years ago, and that came from a local real estate agent who had a client. So again, to answer your question, I really want to focus in 2 areas. One, let's set a vision for the underutilized, underdeveloped areas, because those, I think, will provide a greater opportunity and create less resistance in the community from the folks that want to continue to maintain Plymouth's history.
How would you sort of, the largest industry, arguably in Plymouth is tourism. Certainly it's a big part, probably not the entire part, but it's a big part of the downtown activity. Certainly at certain times of the year it is. And that has to be recognized and appreciated for what it does for the town. What about, do you feel the town, particularly given your experience here in Plymouth, do you feel a need to address light industrial and office commercial presence in the town of Plymouth? And how would you go about getting more sort of non-tourism based, non-downtown, not that there shouldn't be effort put into the downtown, but sort of the other types of economic development that are going to produce jobs and large tax bills?
So again, I think the pandemic certainly has changed the dynamic of light industrial commercial growth. When we think, again, I would go back to looking at our industrial parks and learning more about what's vacant, what's working, what's not working, and then engage businesses around what they think are necessary to continue businesses. But there are hundreds of home-based businesses, not just in Plymouth, but around the Commonwealth, that I feel like are often overlooked. So when you talk about commercial office space, to me, there's an opportunity there. That if we have hundreds of home-based businesses, well, they're limited as to what they can do at home. But can we create a co-op? You see these co-ops have pre-COVID popped up in many places in downtown Boston, where businesses were sharing space. They were using the same meeting space, office space as other businesses were, but they didn't need it Monday through Friday. They only needed it a couple of days a week. So, that's one area of opportunity. I would like to learn to see if Plymouth, if there's a need for co-ops in the light industrial sector. But you did mention the downtown area, and this is something that I've always thought of in my head with one of the potential barriers to making the downtown more of a tourist attraction. I mean, people come to Plymouth for a lot of reasons. We know that they're going to continue to come to Plymouth, but how can we make it more attractive? And I see a disconnect of what's happening in the waterfront versus what's happening on Court Street. And then you have the neighborhoods in between. And so, you know, for me, it's about creating connectivity between those two commercial spaces. And I would really love to work with the economic development director and others in the community on thinking about ways to create that connectivity, because you got restaurants at the top of the hill, you have some at the bottom of the hill, you know, you got the parks at the bottom of the hill. And so trying to get people to move back and forth, back, you know, from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill, I think is immensely important. And then the last thing I would say is, you know, maybe we have to look at ourselves, right? So what policies are preventing us from expanding commercial opportunities? You know, are there height restrictions in certain areas? Are there zoning restrictions in certain areas that are actually preventing us from those types of opportunities that we're not seeing right now? And then the last thing I just throw in before you go on to the next question is working with mass development. So you know, even in a small community like in Upton, like I have had many conversations with mass development. I told them these are the things that are on the horizon in Upton. If you come across developers or real estate agents that are looking to site these types of industries, call us. And then again, work with the state delegation on that as well, so that they also have ears to the ground on those issues as well, is extremely important.
Economic development questions that people may have that we haven't hit upon. I think we hit upon a number of different elements of that, but I want to make sure everyone's set. That okay. Talk about let's come back into the town organization and talk about personnel management and the way in which, as town manager, you would interact with the staff. I mean, I think you did hit upon a key issue when you were talking about challenge facing local government with the ability to fill positions. That is a stumbling block for many communities right now. How would you go about, or tell us your approach to motivating and evaluating employees and holding them accountable? What's your strategy? What's your approach to doing that? With example.
Great question. So and this really came from my time in Upton. Worcester didn't apply this practice, and Plymouth didn't apply this practice either. But I can tell you, and I was talking today in town about this, annual performance evaluations for department heads, I think are absolutely critical. And did a lot of work. So it's not just that, you know, we're checking boxes off. But what I have done in Upton is I meet with all of our department heads annually, and we go through a goal setting process. So oftentimes I ask them to bring goals to me, but during the course of the year, there are things that may trouble me or things that I want to see accomplished, or maybe board members are asking me that they want to see improvements in certain areas. And so I end up setting, you know, anywhere from 5 to 7 goals from each one of our department heads based upon those 3 variables. What's the department head seeing? Because remember, these are our professionals. They should have their ear to the ground on best practices, grant opportunities. I really expect them to be bringing ideas forward, so that we continue year after year to make progress within each one of our departments. But I'm also going to recognize things and see things that I want to accomplish. And the board is also going to recognize things that they want to accomplish. So collectively, we agree on these 5 to 7 goals that I would say need to be realistic, that can be accomplished over the course of that year. So then, depending on the department, so we have agreement. So we go forward, we set these goals. That's then reduced to writing and then documented, put in the file. Some department heads like to circle back 6 months later and do a check-in, a midpoint check-in. Other department heads are like, listen, I can work on these. We'll have conversations in the course of the year. And then at the end of the year, we sit down, we go through them, and we determine whether or not they've been able to accomplish these goals. Now, that's one way to hold the department heads accountable, doing an annual performance review. In some cases, there are financial incentives that are attached to it as well. And so it's worked extremely well in Upton, and it's something that I would want to continue if I were chosen in Plymouth.
What about the rank and file employee, not the department head level, but the people that are, boots on the ground? What's your style of interacting with the staff in general?
So let me tell you a short story. In the military, when there's a new commander who's been appointed, we have this thing called change of command ceremony. And they bring all of the enlisted and the officer board together so they can watch this change of command from the old commander to the new commander. But after that happens, so that's kind of a pump and circumstance. But after that happens, one thing a good commander does, he or she will certainly sit down with his officers, right? So, in the local level, your officers are your department. But what a really good commander does is that he then goes and he sits down with his enlisted force, and he sits and he puts the officers, aside, and he sits and he learns what's happening, on the front lines of their work, and he takes all that in, and that drives a lot of his decision making when ultimately he sets the course for the squadron. And so that's how I look at how I would want to work with all of our staff. Certainly meet with department heads, certainly meet with the department heads command staff. But how can we get at the rank and file, the ones that are front facing the public day in and day out? Because I'm sure they have a story to tell. And I need to hear that story if we're really going to make change.
Okay. What's your, can you give us just an example of a difficult employee matter that you've handled in the past? Obviously without any names or specifics, that you feel that you, either you feel that you handled well, or something that didn't go quite as you thought, but you learned from it as a result.
So this is you said a learning opportunity relative to employees. So I would say there was this one occasion where I was working with a division head, and clearly progress had to be made. So you start the early interventions, you sit down with them behind closed doors, you try to understand some of the root causes of the issues. Are there challenges, are there barriers that are preventing this employee from being able to be a successful contributor to the organization? And so I did all that, and then it didn't work. So then I had to take the next step and put this person on a performance improvement plan. So again, now I'm sitting down with them, charting the course. These are the incremental steps I need you to take to be successful. You need to accomplish these things for the greater good, for the organization. Let's list these things out and we'll come back. That was a struggle, to the point where I then had to set a weekly meeting every Tuesday morning for an hour where I sat with this employee to go over the performance improvement plan. And to be honest with you, this employee never improved. And so it got to the point where I thought I had exhausted all of the remedies necessary to make this, to help this person, be a contributing success. Ultimately, we were going to move to disciplinary action. This specific employee decided to resign and go into retirement. So that I would say was probably one of my most challenging interfaces with an employee that I thought ultimately it worked out well for both sides because no one had to be disciplined, but it was a lot of work on my part just to do everything I could to make this person successful.
Okay.
Excuse me. Give me 1 second.
Yeah. I was worried you hadn't paid your electric bill, but
Sorry, that was my light timer.
collective bargaining, what's talk to us about your approach to collective bargaining.
So I would say this, and this is, I thought you would have just generally asked me something I learned, a mistake that I made that I learned from. So I would say that one of the mistakes that I've learned from is around collective bargaining. So as you know, at least during the time that I was there, the administration and our bargaining units were often at ends with one another. And it created a very contentious, unpleasant working environment for administrators and for bargaining unit employees. And that's how it was when I was there 2 years ago. I can tell you though that I feel like even though that was kind of the mantra, I did everything I could to build relationships with various unions. That being said, I come to Upton, and I had the approach with the Upton unions that I guess my experience was in Plymouth. That this is negotiations, and we will negotiate and do whatever we can to have the best outcome for the town. What I learned in Upton was that does not have to be the course of everything. To the point where I would love to say someday that negotiations, if these aren't collective bargaining negotiations, these are collective bargaining conversations, so that we don't have to have a contentious relationship, that we can, both sides can bring to the table issues of concern, we can resolve them, that both sides say, something, we all walked away with gaining a little out of this, and we're able to shake hands and walk away from that conversation. So my approach today is very different than what than my experience was 5 years ago in Plymouth. And so that would be my approach moving forward, that I would love to sit down with the union presidents early on and start those conversations. Tell me what the issues are so that I know about them up front, so we can do whatever we can to mitigate those, to prevent future grievances, grievance hearings. We're just combusting energy, we're combusting money at that time, and no side is winning it.
Derek, one of the priorities of the board when they brought us on to help with this search is that they wanted a town manager to improve communications with residents and improve services to residents. It really is sort of committing to engaging with the community and becoming part of the community. How would you go about doing that if you were to become the town manager of Plymouth?
Well, as far as becoming the fabric of the community, it would definitely be my intention to purchase a home in town so that, I can start to, have the same feel that every resident has, driving through town, going to the local market and having that same experience. So it's different when you don't have that lived experience and then going ahead and trying to make decisions for those people that haven't had lived experience. So I definitely want to be a part of the community in that way. One thing, and in Upton, though, Upton doesn't have nearly as many community events as Plymouth would. But even we would always have a Memorial Day parade. And my former chairman was he's a retired Coast Guard officer. And for 20 plus years during the Memorial Day parade, he would wear his uniform. And when he found out that I was an officer in the military, he highly encouraged me to wear my uniform and walk with him in the Memorial Day parade. So it was, I would want to continue to engage in all the different community events that Plymouth has to offer. I feel like the more visible the town manager is, people can start to understand where he or she is coming from, and it then provides for conversations that normally wouldn't have happened otherwise. So that's kind of like on a personal level. On a professional level, I'd love to see Plymouth do the things that we did in Worcester, where we honestly would engage the communities at multiple different levels. And we wouldn't just have, in Worcester, we wouldn't just have these quote unquote town hall meetings where we would invite people to come talk to us. There were so many different neighborhoods in Worcester. We would actually set an agenda where we would go to these neighborhoods and have conversations right, at places where they felt most comfortable. So, I'd like to explore that a little bit of how we can engage folks at that level. And I remember doing that over at the lodge over in Manamet. They would have a monthly meeting, and I would try to attend that meeting just to talk to the the residents of Manamet on things that happened in that neighborhood.
In terms of relationships, we're coming close to the time here, so I do want to get into this with you. One of your most important relationships is with the select board. Talk to us about what that looks like. How do you interact with the select board in Upton? How do you see yourself interacting with the select board in Plymouth?
So the first thing I would love to do with the select board's approval is have a workshop of goal setting. Clearly, all 5 of them are on the board because they want to see change. And we all come at this for different reasons and have different opinions. And so collectively, I want to have a goal setting process so we can identify what are some of the short-term goals, what's some of the low-hanging fruit that the board agrees that we need to work on right away. And then at the same time, what are some of the long-term strategic plans we have to start to chart the course for? And so that would be something I'd want to do early on with the board members. And certainly, like any other board members, I would want to talk to them on a regular basis, just because they're the ones that are going to get the phone calls from their constituents. Pothole in my neighborhood, this is a problem, the trees down in my neighborhood. And so, I need to hear that so we can resolve those issues right away. So having conversations on a regular basis with board members certainly is super important to me, just so I can get a sense of what the needs are out there. As you know, really, any big items that I would want us to go back to the future select board meeting, have a discussion in open session so that the board collectively will support any big priority issues, and that it's not being directed by one individual over another. Because as you know, when that happens, there's this consternation that can happen and people get upset. So it's really about engaging them early on about goal setting, and then having regular conversations over the course of the work week in order to make sure we're staying at pace.
If I could just, Jarek, one last thing for me. I just want to follow up on something you said. It would be your intention to buy a home here in Plymouth. Would that be your primary residence? And would you agree to something like that in your contract that you would?
Yes. So my goal, so when I worked in town 5 years ago, I actually rented. It would be my goal this time around to commit to purchasing a home and then establishing residency in the home as well.
Okay, all right.
And yeah, and to your last question, yeah, absolutely. You know, if it makes the board feel more comfortable, I have no problem with putting that in the contract as well.
Okay, all right. I think I hit on all the questions that we had, but I want to make sure the board members have time to ask any other additional questions. So I'll turn it over to Charlie.
Hey, Derek, how you doing? Most of my questions have been answered. Economic development, adversities that you overcame. So, but I had a couple, one of them, you just answered it. I had one of the town meeting members, and oh, by the way, in case you forgot, we have 135 members here. So you got 135 bosses. So, and the good thing about our town meeting members, a lot of them are very, very active, and they pay attention to what's going on. And it's a good thing for the town. You know, they can be critical, but, you know, they care about the town just like we all do. So you'll be getting used to that. You'll be getting emails and phone calls and everything else. But this one town meeting member called me, and she said, I just have a question. When he left Plymouth, he didn't want to commute to Worcester anymore. And I said, I don't think that's the reason. I think he became a town manager, which you've already answered that. That's you went to Upton, your resume clearly says that. So I said, I think he may be buying a home. You answered that. You and your wife, you're going to buy a home here. And I think that's going to make a lot of people happy too if you get the job. So my question is, and I'm going to ask all the candidates, where do you see yourself in 4 to 5 years, Derek?
Where do I see? Well, you know, I would say that my hope is that Plymouth would be my last stop before retirement. I am 47 now. My goal is to retire somewhere between age 60 and age 62. I love Plymouth for a lot of reasons. And I do believe that I can make an impact in the community over the course of a career. And so 5 years is a very short window. In fact, I've been in Upton for 5 years. I feel like I just got and the only reason why I am considering leaving Upton is because, to me, you know, Plymouth is truly a place where, you know, I see myself, and it's a career opportunity to go back to Plymouth and work with the select board and leading this community through change.
Thank you. So,
Okay. Harry?
you answered everything for me.
Yeah, Derek, I have a couple of follow-up questions. Some a little bit more specific, some are more policy oriented. How would you propose balancing development, residential, which is ongoing, commercial, which could be upcoming, with important environmental concerns?
Yeah, that's a challenging question, and you know, like I had earlier mentioned, to balance environmental concerns, let's focus on the areas that are already been developed and maybe are underutilized. You know, because if we focus there, then that will help respond to some of the environmental concerns that take place not in just Plymouth, but take place in every community. You know, there's a strong voice out there to protect the environment, climate change, and things of that nature. So I would want to focus on underutilized spaces first. That being said, you know, there's a program called it's a municipal vulnerability preparedness program. It's a program through the state, you know, that every community has the opportunity to be what is called MVP certified. And that certification is mostly focused on climate resiliency. But once you become MVP certified, you have an opportunity to then go ahead and seek project dollars through the program. And what I have seen, at least in Central Mass, many of the project dollars are environmentally safe. So, for example, there was a neighboring community that received $300,000 to create green space and to expand their local parking lot. So what they did with those dollars is that then, clearly, taking trees down and putting on more asphalt would pose a significant problem to runoff. But what they use these dollars for is to acquire a permeable asphalt, so it recharges the aquifer beneath it. And so that's just a small example of things that I think we should think about when we think about development. Now, even if a developer comes in town, what technology is out there that we can require developers to implement that would make it more environmentally sound?
Yeah, just following up on that, the next town manager is going to be inheriting a new position, the Climate Sustainability Coordinator, that will report to the town manager. How would you interface with that employee, with that manager?
Well, I would, I'd first want to know whether or not if this individual has already been assigned to a specific department. And if the answer is no, then given the national conversation about climate change and climate resiliency, I think I would want to interface with that person more as a dotted line, almost like an emergency manager director has that dotted line to the town manager. Emergency. I would want to create some type of dotted line with this individual so that I could have regular face-to-face conversations around this issue. Because again, it's super important, and I think it's even magnified in a community like Plymouth, being a seacoast community.
Yeah, perhaps I wasn't clear, Derek. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it is my belief that that position will report to the town manager as being proposed at town meeting.
You're correct. You're correct. And you're going to be, I believe the town manager will be making that hire. That person has not been hired yet.
And back to my point, I think, I was saying the dotted line, but there has to be a regular interface with the town manager in that position, just because of everything that's going on nationally and locally regarding climate change, climate resiliency. Those issues are for most communities, in probably top 3 to 5 priorities.
Okay. Derek, one last question. Could you tell me why you did not originally put your name in the original search when it was advertised?
Sure. So I've been following the town of Plymouth for 5 years. Reading the OCM as often as possible. And there was a certain, and so I always said to myself and said to others that it would be my hope to return to Plymouth someday as the town manager. Now, there was a period of time where I didn't think that would ever present itself. And then with the transition that has taken place over the fall, the opportunity did present itself. Now, at that time, this is more a personal reason, my family situation back in September, October would not have allowed me to be the town manager. In December, that has changed. And again, my wife and I have 2 young grandchildren that we were primary caretakers, and that no longer is required. So my wife and I, our youngest son, he's a freshman in college, and my little daughter, she's graduating from Massachusetts. So we're basically, for the most part, empty nesters now that we don't have the obligations to care for the grandchildren. But that's the truth. That just my family situation didn't allow for this fall, and then in December, we no longer are required to be there to assist my son his fiance with the children. So once I had noticed that there was another opening, I knew that Plymouth was where I wanted to be. I just needed to make sure it was the right time in the right place. And that all just, fortunately for me, fell into place given the circumstances that arose over the last couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Other board questions? Dick?
Thank you. Derek, in Plymouth, we have a height restriction, and I believe it was a town meeting or two ago, I wasn't here. Where existing sites such as our 2 industrial parks could go up in height. I believe it was 20 feet, but I'm not positive. And it failed at town meeting for what reasons I really don't know. But I also know that sometimes you got to go find out what the problem was, be presented. Sometimes it matters on the way it was explained. Because that's one of the crucial things we're going to have to figure out. In my decision for a town manager is how we're going to move forward with economic development. And I'm really happy that you touched on goals, because that's one of the things this board first did. And I was persistent on it, and I've already started on it in January to pass on to the town manager. And we gave quite a list. I think it was in the 30s. I mean, we didn't expect you to get it all done in a month, but I have to say we prioritized them. One went to town meeting. We got another new position that'll be starting, which is going to be a grant writer, which was awarded to Tiffany Park in your previous office, your tenure. I believe you know Tiffany. And so it was nice to see that come on board, and we'll see what happens with that. That one's still at large. And the goals and I want to thank you for all your time. I know you've been sitting in the chair for a little while, and but this is a big position for the community, as you know. So we have to take our time, which is, why we gave it the amount of time that we did give for this tonight. So that's really all I have. Everything I was going to ask, was already been asked. So, so thank you. Bernie? Oh, Bernie, I have one question for you, though.
Sure.
Do you have an idea roughly how many town manager positions are, say, open in the state of Mass or not filled?
I think right now there are 20 positions open. It comes as a shock, but I actually keep track of this stuff. I think there are 20 positions open right now, and I think there's another probably 12 to 15 that will be opening up in the next month.
So there's a lot of movement.
There is a lot of movement, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. Thank you, Derek, and I appreciate you taking all this time for us. Mine aren't really that difficult. When you talked about regionalizing certain communities and stuff like that, and you discussed best practices and benchmarks. One of my experiences coming from the nuclear field is that we were always with best practices, benchmarking different areas. Do you see any opportunities just off the top of your head? And I know you're not here, but do you see any opportunities off the top of your head now, for regionalizing some kind of best practices and benchmarking in this area?
I do. One, because I have a lot of experience in regionalizing public health. There was just a grant opportunity the state issued probably 2 months ago, where they identified certain geographic areas around the state, where they infused hundreds of thousands of dollars in even small municipalities to take on a regional public health model. And they gave money for these municipalities to hire inspectors, epidemiologists, administrators, I was surprised to see how much money some of these small municipalities are getting. And in return, they had to go ahead and hire the staff, and then they would then go ahead and provide services to area municipalities. I'm surprised that Plymouth wasn't in that conversation. Maybe they were. I don't know what transpired, but I know that Plymouth wasn't one of those communities chosen. But that's one area. And everything that's gone on with COVID, that would have been an area that I think that we really could have pursued, because it would have given us the bandwidth to be able to work with the Board of Health in the community in order to give them the science and the data that they need in order to make data-driven decisions. So that's one area. The other area, I know that we were exploring when I was in Plymouth, 5 years ago, was regional dispatch. Regional dispatch brings hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to a municipality. For example, again, Upton's a small community. We provide a regional dispatch service to one of our neighboring communities, and we bring in $300,000 just through the 911 unit alone. So, Selectman Caraco, I think that those are two areas off the top of my head that we should at least look at and ask the questions. Maybe meet with some of our folks in the state delegation to learn more about how we can get involved in some of those opportunities.
And just one other thing is that you had mentioned being able to do many of your permitting processes online and getting that funded by the CARES Act. However, this whole process goes, I'm hopeful that, maybe that's some information that you can provide to our administration, because I know that we have some CARES Act money still. And I know that one of the goals of this board was to do exactly what you said and make things easier online with, permits and things like that. So I think that's really important. I know that our building inspector has been working on it. So I'm, very interested to be able to hear more about that at some point, no matter how this whole thing goes.
Yeah, I would be happy to talk to your building inspector and share the information. There's some great software products that are out there. And the one that we use is actually sold from the community Westboro, and we've only heard good things about it. So I'm happy to share some of that information.
Thank you so much.
Great. I think that wraps everything up. Derek, thank you for joining us. Any closing comments you'd like to make?
Only that, I want to thank the board and everybody for organizing this this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the board, let them know all the things that I've done since I last saw them 5 years ago. But I just, want folks to know that, I always, had a hope that someday I could return to Plymouth. And, I enjoyed my time in Plymouth, but I had to leave because of a career opportunity in Upton. And so it would be great if I could return and work with not only the select board, but all the different staff members who I would grade them all as like top-notch department staff. So looking forward to hearing from you all. If I am not the chosen candidate, I wish you all well in the future. And my phone is always available if you have any questions regarding anything we talked about today. So again, thank you so much, and look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Dick, my number of 20 might be a little high. It might be close to 15.
I didn't write it down. No, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Need a break? Ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, who's our next? I think we have Jen
I
Callahan.
have Jen Callahan. Yep, she's on her way in now.
Okay. Hey, Jen.
Hi,
Okay.
Dave.
Good evening.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. I'm going to,
Terrific.
thanks. Thanks for joining us, and I'm going to quickly turn you over to the chair, and he'll have all the board members introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into the interview. All right, Dick?
Okay, sounds good.
Welcome, Ms. Callahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Betty?
Oh, I'm as ready as ever. Thank you. You go right ahead.
Okay, Betty?
Hi, my name is Betty Cavaco, and I'm in my second term, and I am the vice chair of the select board in Plymouth.
Patrick?
Hi, Patrick Flaherty. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Harry?
Hi, I'm Harry Helm. I am a relatively recent addition to the Board of Selectmen, having been elected last May. And prior to that, I spent many years on the Advisory and Finance Committee.
Charlie?
Jennifer, Charlie Bletzer, very nice to meet you. I'm brand new. I got elected in a special election in August 14th. So
Okay.
I'm
Congratulations.
the newbie, so very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Okay. All right. Well, Jennifer, let's, the board has had an opportunity to look at your materials, your resume, your cover letter, and there were some references, comments that that we received from references regarding your background. Perhaps though you could just sort of give us a sense of why you're interested in this position, why you believe you would be successful.
Thank you. And through you, Bernie, to all the members of the board. First of all, I do want to say it is really very humbling that I have been given this opportunity. I mean that sincerely. I've spent the better part of about 26, 27 years, both in elected and appointed positions in government institutions, and public service is truly at my heart. And I mean that sincerely. I, recognized as I got older, but not too old, to understand what truly moves me and what do I really love doing. And as you know, I have been an elected school board member where I started out. So Charlie, I can understand what you might be feeling like now, being able to go to a board that's called the select board. I also served on the select board, and I also had the opportunity to serve in the House of Representatives for a little over 8 years, which was a distinct honor. But through all of that, I went from, the 5,000 foot level in a Piper Cub, plane, looking at the landscape below to a 35,000 foot level, being in the State House. And what I did truly miss when I had been at the State House was that day-to-day kind of opportunity you have to help shape a community and move it forward. So Plymouth is very, very professionally the right, I think, fit for me at this time in my career. I have to tell you that I am a first generation immigrant daughter. My father came here on a different boat that landed a little bit more south, not here in Plymouth Harbor. But I have to tell you, when I have been in the center and down by the waterfront, I often think about things like that, how I have been able to enrich my life, to help other people and advocate. So Plymouth strikes to that core. Behind me, you can see a beautiful painting. My sister is a real consummate artist. And when I told her I had the opportunity to actually interview with all of you, she thought that was just terrific because of the history of creative arts in this community. Finally, I do think that my professional background allows me the opportunity to work in a large community such as Plymouth. I have had the opportunity to represent over 45,000 constituents in 5 different communities over a large geographic area. This fits my profile in a lot of ways. And I also feel that it's kind of important to mention that it isn't my first interest in the town of Plymouth. I actually applied for an assistant town manager position when I first had left the legislature. I had been a finalist for a deputy position in Natick, and I was looking at larger communities like Plymouth and Natick. I wound up making a decision to go a different route at that time to be the actual administrator, but I hadn't had the opportunity to get interviewed for that position. And so that was like back in 2015. So here I am before you with more experience under my belt and hopefully enough information that gives you a good perception of who I am.
Great. Well, let's talk about your, if you were to be appointed town manager, you'd come in and you'd be running the municipal organization on a day-to-day basis. Talk to us about what your style looks like, how you do manage, your current organization, how you would manage and lead the Plymouth organization, and then I'll have some follow-up questions to sort of go with that.
Sure, I have a very open door policy, and I know that sounds cliche to people, and a lot of people will say it, but they don't really abide by it. Oftentimes, much to my own detriment, depending on what is the priorities of the day and the emergent priorities that take place that have not been on someone's radar. Oftentimes, I will be very much available to department heads. Matter of fact, it's 24 hours a day. They have my cell phone. I have given them complete, understanding that if they need to get in touch with me, they know how to do that. I'm also someone who isn't there to create friction in a department. I'm there to be as supportive as possible. I look at myself and I know the clear difference between being an elected leader and being a municipal manager. And I will leave many of the different types of roles, particularly for policy making and for directional movement of a community, to the elected leaders. I look at my role as trying to help move the government structure forward in tandem with what the goals and objectives are for this board in terms of policy. So what I find myself doing is being very much strong advocate of every department that is under the government structure. I learn as much as I can about all of the different important things that come with a department. And so in that regard, there's nothing below me to learn. I don't care if it's how we're going to clean basic facilities in the middle of a pandemic and restructure our workforce to make that happen. Or if it's something much more high level in meeting with the finance director to understand how we're going to face a loss in pilot funding, let's just say, using the Pilgrim nuclear plant as a real challenge for the community, and making sure you have that dialogue with the department head. So it's really trying to both support the needs of the department heads and all of the staff and work that way up into not only the budgetary requests, but really importantly, the strategic plan for each of these departments. I want you to know that I've spent some time doing some research, even in a short period of time, to get a feel. I think this is your time to evaluate me, and hopefully my time also to evaluate the community. And I have been doing that, and we can perhaps explore some of the ways and some of the information I have found. But my style is very much accessible, very open, supportive, and mostly trying to take complex issues that many of our department heads are very skilled at and very professional and experts at, take those complex issues and boil them down into something that's understandable for the public, understandable for the boards that are related to those departments, and most of all, somehow come up with a cohesive plan to move that forward, particularly hand in glove with the Board of Selectmen.
Well, Jen, you opened the door. You said you've been doing the research, and you have some thoughts regarding the town and the structure. And so that's something actually that I was just going into. So I'm interested in what your observations are, what your thoughts are regarding possible restructuring. Where might you make some changes? And what's been your experience in leading organizations through change?
Sure. I mean, the town of Plymouth has an incredible portfolio attached to it. I've served in a Chamber of Commerce as a board director on 2 different occasions, even though I did not own a business. And it was because I understood that interplay and the importance of economic development and vitalization of a thriving economy in a community. However, Plymouth itself, just your town hall, the investment that the townspeople made in that town hall is truly remarkable. And in this day and age, where you can walk into any community and, you're brass knuckling over, a small investment on a wastewater treatment plant, this town understood the importance of taking, a real true integral part of its history, the courthouse, and meld it with the governance structure of this town. And you are to be commended, all of you that have done that. And I know that I've had the honor in the past of working with a very influential, and I call them powerhouse delegation, where their eyes were always focused on Plymouth. And that, of course, includes the legendary Senate President Terry Murray, Vinnie DiMacedo, your state rep and a state senator for many years, and also Representative Coulter. All of those people were very strong advocates for the town. And the investment that the townspeople make in coordination with state delegation, and I know you have two new people, not new since I've been here. You have Representative Muratori and also Senator Moran, who I know are very, very engaged in the community. You can see that through all of their outreach and public outreach efforts that they do. The investment in research that I have done has indicated to me, one, that your staff are all really looking towards a hopeful time where they will have a good fit for their manager. I've had the opportunity to speak with a sergeant in the police force for well over 40 minutes, learning a lot about the town. Lee Hartman, who is your acting director, is a wealth of information. And long before I got to speak with him, I had heard from a number of people on the outside what a consummate professional he is, and I'm sure he's been serving you very capably at this time of transition. You have a terrific finance director, and you have all the elements that make this town successful. But mostly, I think the leadership of the board wanting to work in concert with all of the professional staff tell me that you're a terrific community to work for. And that is what I think I have gleaned from all of the discussions I've had and the visits. I've been to a number of your municipal buildings. I saw at least 50 parents and their kids ice skating in 24-degree weather on a bright sunny day this past weekend. Those are things that show me you are invested in your community, and I can see that and I can feel it, and you can sense it. So somebody who has served in public office and also served as a manager and administrator, that's very important for a professional move.
What's been your experience in managing change within an organization? Because I think I would agree that there's great staff, great department heads within the town, but there may need to be some changes in the way that the government functions, the way that there's always changing needs that require the organization to adapt to those changes. Talk to us about your experience in, managing change and, or managing organizations through a period of change.
Sure. I think aside from the fact that I have been a manager, I don't want to dismiss my past work prior to ever taking on elected or a hired role in municipal government or state government. I had been a senior quality advisor to the largest employer in central Massachusetts for a number of years, long before I ever decided to actually seek elected office. And during that time period, I was a certified team facilitator. I was somebody who also was certified in total quality improvement methods in a large healthcare organization, which when you compare large healthcare organizations to large government organizations, there are a lot of similarities. And in fact, in some ways, the parallel is one in which it makes it easy if you have had experience in trying to facilitate change, which is not always everyone's forte, then you understand how to do it from one organization to another. So I have used a number of different processes, including having worked very closely with all department heads on a regular basis. We had looked to actually implement key performance indicators, educating staff about what those are, looking at how we can actually mutually do a value analysis to come to an understanding of what that is. But also, I think if you treat departments as much fairly as possible and with an understanding through planning, whether it's capital planning or budgetary planning, you can move the initiatives of a town forward. I know in your budget this year, you are looking to do a number of things. One, you're looking to change the way the contracts for IT used to be under all the different departments and putting them really under IT. That's an example of an organizational change method that I think is a good example of how with time things do change. During the pandemic in my community, there were a number of things that made us do business differently, even to this day. Once we discovered that our library did not have as much foot traffic when we were shut down, one of the things that our librarian director understood and acknowledged is that there was a much higher demand for technology cataloging librarian skills. And so what wound up actually happening is a restructuring to actually bring in a librarian science, a master's of science person who has that skill set, which is vitally important to connecting the community while we continue with this pandemic in ways that the library never had. So it's supporting the department heads for those kinds of initiatives, articulating them to the board and the finance advisory committee, and making the case for when those things need to be done. And I think most departments understand there are time periods where they're the focus of attention and other times other people aren't. In fiscal year 20, even though we were faced with some daunting potential difficult financial projections from the state, we had been working for more than a year with the Department of Public Works to updating and making radical changes in the compensation plan, as well as drafting 21st century job descriptions. I encountered job descriptions that went back 40 years and never had been changed. Working with a group of 12 members of the DPW and facilities areas, we were able to overcome any kinds of concerns that they had, put forward a great plan, and made sure that even during the pandemic, we honored that. And so they understand going forward, there will be other departments that have to take primary importance. So it's that give and take. It's that facilitating those kinds of things, supporting them when you can. And I know that there will be a lot of personnel adjustments right away or hirings. I think when you did your publication of the position, you were speaking in the 40s for open positions, speaking with your human resource director, I had gleaned that might be as many as 51 positions. So it will be a busy first start for the management to make sure these positions where they're crucially needed are retained as quickly as possible, and those departments are supported in the work that they do.
Okay. A brief, if you could just briefly give us a sense of your sort of perspective on local government issues. Tell us a long-term, what you consider to be the greatest long-term threat that local government has to is encountering or will encounter, and a short-term, the greatest threat in the short term that local government in general needs to consider.
I think this pandemic has been the greatest challenge to any community. It certainly has, turned upside down the way we do government. Look at where we're here today, on a Zoom call doing an interview where we never would have thought of doing that 2 years ago. When I say it's been a challenge and a threat, having been a manager facing the barrel of a gun when the state had told us that we were looking at financial shortfalls that were equal and in excess of the years of 2007 and 2009, which I served back to back during 2 major recessions. And we've been climbing out of it. And then the pandemic hits. And then the state says, we're so concerned with the amount of people out of work that we're going to ask and advise communities to anticipate actually reductions in local aid and state aid back to those time periods, And then on top of that, 20 and 30% more. You can imagine as a manager looking at that and saying, okay, how are we going to actually work even mid-year before we even know what the revenues are for the state? And remember, the state didn't even set its budget to many, many months after local municipalities had, even though many of us had, town meetings that were a little bit later, elections that were a little bit later, and were conforming to all of these new requirements. So I think the biggest challenge will still remain how the community actually weathers that storm. And it's not just germane to the town of Plymouth. There has been a lot of money, federal and state, and I know recently you have also, through your county treasurer, who I actually served with before, Tom O'Brien, and forgot about that. I saw that you had, recently gotten your county award for some federal funding. But when this money actually goes away, and if the economy doesn't continue to rebound, and particularly an economy like Plymouth, which has had this huge amount of investment, and in speaking with some people, I've learned that you've had, upwards of over $40 million invested in the downtown, along the waterfront, a new wharf. You've had dredging in your harbor to bring in bigger boats. This town is so poised well to try to come out of this pandemic if we could only continue to move in that direction, which I think we will. But what still remains to be seen is how quickly everything will return to normal, and whether inflation across the country will stay low enough and people will continue to invest and our tax collections will stay up. So I think both the pandemic is the biggest challenge, but it's also, I think, the biggest opportunity for government to really focus on how it wants to plan to come out of it, and how it will actually set straight the next 5 to 10 years for a community to withstand.
Okay. Any questions on this category that anyone any board members want to I've missed? Okay, let's move into financial management. Talk to us. You kind of alluded to that a couple times now with the cuts that that people thought might be necessary in 2020 or for 2021. But so clearly you seem to have your eye on the issue of financial management. So talk to us about what your financial management or your approach would be to managing the finances of Plymouth, and specifically tie it to what you've experienced as a local government manager in your prior positions.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I think every community wrestles with are, things that relate to the core pieces of our budget. And we know that we need personnel to actually execute the business of people's every single day. We know we need teachers, we know we need DPW workers and firefighters and police. I mean, that is the crux of how we make government work. And so when you talk about people, you're talking about salaries, you're talking about benefits, you're talking about retirements and pensions. And, I am aware that Plymouth is very unique in some of the things that it does offer its employees. I do know that they're ready to hopefully finalize or with the new manager finalize some collective bargaining agreements that will be very important to continuing to retain good employees, to be competitive with neighboring communities with salaries and benefits. But the uniqueness of Plymouth I am aware of is that the beneficence of the town, I mean the town's people in approving and voting their budgets each year does include, I think, a very, very supportive benefit structure to their employees. That is not always the case in every community. And I think that with time, having open dialogue, and I know that those kinds of things sometimes take place when someone's looking at OPEB and which are the other, post-employment benefits that a community has. This community has at least $10 million in its stabilization fund for that, we call it a stabilization, but trust fund. The community of Oxford has about 5.6 million, much smaller community, but has a healthy sum that's put away in comparison to how large this community is. So the goal of things like that are to have open dialogue about how do you look at the employees going forward? How do you make sure that you can sustain those kinds of important benefits that keep your workforce going and make your workforce feel valued? So I think, you know, when I look at a budget, I look at all of the major pieces of it. And here you can look at almost 74% of the budget is really in the salaries and benefit structures. And then you have, you know, 17% or so in some other, you know, normal expenses that you would have for running departments. So, you know, you have a very large school district, 155 million of your budget goes to that, about 116 million goes to your actual municipal side. What it shows me is that from what I can glean is that the school district has worked cooperatively with the Finance Advisory Committee, the management structure, and this board in keeping good quality schools. You've done a lot for the infrastructure. I know that they're at the moment with increasing enrollment in one high school and decreasing enrollment in another. Across the Commonwealth, enrollments are going down. So I understand that there's an evaluation for looking at all the buildings and, you know, going forward, how they'll structure it maybe in the next year or two. So you have a lot in which you want to continue to maintain. And for me, you know, looking at a budget each year, you've got to look at what your revenues are coming in. What are your places to go when you have emergencies? I'm really pleased to see you have a number of stabilization accounts in this community. That has been the name of my game for every community I have been in, is emphasizing fiscal conservancy, but in the way of putting things for a rainy day, a savings for a rainy day. Most communities have one stabilization account. You have a general stabilization account of about 12 million from what I understand. But then you have a number of other ones. You have a pavement management account, you have a facilities account, you have your OPEB, and you have the Pilgrim decommissioning account. All of those netted together are important. And I do see something that I do like in this community, and that is understanding when to go to those places of fiscal support and when to shy away from them. And I think as you go forward, I would do the same thing that I do in my community now, which is put as much money as we can to savings, but making sure we are not being penny wise and pound foolish. It takes money to run a government. You don't want to be overkill with it, but at the same time, you don't want to be so far below what the mark is that you can't actually support the programs and services that are vital to people. So I think looking at the actual policies that you have in place are important. In the community I currently am in, they didn't have financial policies, management policies, and procedures, both of how the departments operate as well as how they'll actually be an integral part for generating revenues and receipts for the community. We have that now. We did that with a $20,000 community compact grant. We had another compact grant in which we just was informed that we had received the Government Finance Officers Administrators Award for a budget documents for the first comprehensive budget document award. And so that is taking a community that did not have things such as that to a different level. And it's showing that it's paying terrific dividends back to the community, because all of our financial indicators are not only a little bit improved, they're vastly improved. And it's allowed us to do so much more in deferred capital maintenance, so much more in terms of investing in capacity building within the budget. So we have positions that we never had before because we can afford them. And we know we can afford them with budget projections going out, 5 and 7 years. And that's what you have to do. It's an essential piece of being able to plan, budget conservatively, and also leverage resources to grow, the ability within your budget on an annual basis to meet new initiatives and or to build capacity in particular departments.
Jen, you mentioned that the indicators have been heading in the right direction. Very briefly, where were you? Where are you now? I mean, in terms of when you
Sure.
started, where were you on reserves? Where are you now?
Sure. So this community, when I came, I actually thought it was an error that I was printing off from the Department of Revenue, or DLS, Division of Local Services. Their spending had been such that they had basically burned through about 4.5 million of their overall reserves, in their stabilization account when I came in through the door was about $287,000 for a $50 million a community organization. That was terrifying to see that, because that means that if the community had any major, catastrophic event, or even if the pandemic had hit earlier, I think we would have been hard pressed to be able to withstand that. Having said that, the Department of Revenue looks to communities to meet a particular standard, and they typically like to see the stabilization account for general stabilization in the 5% range. And I'm happy to say that we will be in that, several $1 million now to the positive, to be able to have that in the community. Looking at capital spending, the free cash certifications were so dismal in the town of Oxford until myself and the financial team came together. I'm sure this board understands that, free cash is not free. It's the way that you actually try to maximize what you have in receipts at the end of the year that you did not use, or that money that you've chased down for reimbursement or grants you've leveraged, all of those things. And, I can say again, unequivocally, that the community had always been delayed in certifying its free cash. So there was no way of knowing when you started planning your budget what you might have available for capital infrastructure and planning. We created a 5-year capital plan. We've had record early certifications for free cash, working with our assessor, treasurer, and our finance director in using those standards now that are in place. We now have been averaging anywhere between 2.5 million and over 3.2 million for annual certifications, which then allows us to plan very methodically about what we are going to make improvements for our capital needs, and then make sure that the following year we can do as well as we did the previous year. So it's a combination of leveraging both grant funding. It's making sure that if we have opportunities to offset certain types of expenditures, we can do that. My department heads know that I'll give them a very gentle reminder at the beginning of April to make sure, as we approach May and June, make sure that anything that's owed to us in terms of reimbursement for grant opportunities from the state or from any local foundation, that we make sure that we get those reimbursements in, because all of that then gets credited to our bottom line, which helps us overall be able to stabilize the planning for the upcoming year.
Okay, talk to me about one last financial question for me. OPEB liability. That is like the arguably, we talked about the great threats facing a local government. That's right up there, depending on one's perspective. But how have you dealt with OPEB liabilities in your communities?
So I think one of the best ways you can do that is through having a structured financial policy. You have a great bond rating, but I know that it could even be even better. But I'm sure that they look at the liability. When you talk about a $1 billion liability, that's huge, but the town of Plymouth is huge, has a lot of moving parts to it. You don't expect necessarily to be in that realm. That's pretty high for a community. And part of it is looking to show commitment on a regular basis that you will put money towards that liability. I understand that the town is doing that. I understand that another way to actually help move that liability down from such a high figure is to look at making tweaks to the overall benefit structures. That would be helpful when they go and they look at, you know, trying to ascertain where that liability will be. From what I understand, there has been some tweaks to that for future employees, which actually speaks well to those people who would be assessing where that liability would fall for the town in future years. I understand that you could have had savings of upward of maybe perhaps 43 million off of that 1 billion, but it's still 1 billion. So you can keep working on that. But the big thing here is putting money in on a regular basis, not necessarily, you know, putting huge sums, but putting it in on a regular basis shows commitment to bonding authorities and to those who actually determine the liability, that the town is committed over time to trying to address that. And I would want that to continue because it shows good resiliency on the part of the community financially.
Okay. Any questions on finance that board members have? Okay. One of the ways that communities often look to solve any financial stresses that they have is economic development. Of course, there's a balancing part to that as well. What do you see as the role of the town manager in promoting economic development? And can you give us some examples from your current or past experiences that illustrate what your that role would look like in the town of Plymouth?
Sure. I think I mentioned before that I have worked hand in glove with a regional chamber of commerce and had done that on workforce development and also tourism. Those were two areas, even going back to when I was a selectman, that I really you know, felt I had not only a particular interest, but I think I had a good understanding of how that was in a heritage corridor where I grew up and where I was living, a national heritage corridor. And I know that the town of Plymouth has something like over 300, the municipality has over 300 acres that are, you know, designated as, you know, a national heritage sites. And so for me, you know, I think that Plymouth has a very unique opportunity and a history. Okay, you know, everybody says you're America's hometown. That absolutely is palpable in everything that is done on the main streets and all the way out to the periphery where you have actually put some new development in. But one of the things that's unique about Plymouth that we don't have necessarily in some of the gateway cities or larger communities that were very industrial revolution based is that you don't have these mammoth mills and, you know, very failing infrastructure that's extremely costly to figure out how to either remove or to repurpose. I know that you've done the cordage mill and it's still in the process, and you've done phenomenal work on taking, you know, a pre-existing large scale, you know, facility that served a real historic, valuable economic purpose in the town. But now you also have vast areas of open land. You have, you know, just an incredible punch sheet, I call it, for master planning when you look at all of the wonderful things that the community has. And so it becomes a real balancing act of trying to say, okay, how do we bring in, you know, more commercial and business development, and how do we balance that with mammoth developments that are taking place in the community. And I would say that you have to do that with I think, a very planned approach of working closely, not only with your area chamber of commerce, but I understand you also have a regional economic development foundation in which some members of the board in the past have served, and even the manager has served as a trustee in the past. So I think, you know, the same way that I do that outreach and coordination with the director for planning and economic development. And like I said, you've got a gem of a person. I can see him down there in the bottom of my screen, Lee Hartman, who knows everything about Plymouth and understands both the constraints and the needs as you're going forward. I would see my role in working very closely with that department, in working very closely with looking at what are the impediments. Is it something that, if we had a sewer water line or a new water treatment facility, that we could actually do more development for commercial business. I understand you're a bio-ready community, which is fabulous. You're at gold status, not quite platinum status, but maybe you work with the Board of Health on coming up with some of the regulations that make it even more palatable for a business to locate there. I mean, there's so many things that the town of Plymouth has going for it. Aside from lots of acreage, you also have, a large, decommissioned nuclear facility with like 1,500 acres surrounding it. And I know that they are going through that, what will be, I think a eventful process for the community to have to try to work with, the business to see, are they going to hold on to all the land? Is it something that they'll think about bequeathing to the town? I think those dialogues are going to be very important. I don't think from what I can glean that has been decided yet. And, I think you also have some real opportunity in some areas of town where you have very large swath of, property that's not, doesn't have a clear title, that's in tax title. That's an area that I have been very effective in, particularly in the town that I'm in right now, working with some really good legal firms and also the treasurer collector to actually turn around and bring in one year $985,000 in uncollected taxes. And it wasn't just through a land auction. Over 400,000 were brought just through actually working very diligently and being able to move those properties from non-payment into payment status. So I think there's some real, very intriguing opportunities. And I think with all of the work that has been done and the investment that has been done, particularly in the downtown waterfront area, I think you're ripe for being able to generate across the globe when people are going to be really wanting to continue to break free of this pandemic, to want to visit beautiful places. And so let's not dismiss the creative economy and the blue economy that you have. It's all of that together. And that's why I say it's such a dynamic place. And there's so many great opportunities to work with state and federal lawmakers to help figure out ways in which to leverage, financial support and grant opportunities that may or may not be being taken care of at this moment, but certainly there'd be opportunities to make those, points heard and hopefully leverage some more of that support.
How would you balance the residential and commercial development with environmental concerns? How do you, what's been your experience in doing that?
Well, I think everyone understands there are laws that protect not just open spaces, but also environmentally fragile areas. I do understand that aside from being the largest community and having all of this open space and this huge number of miles of coastline, you have over 365 ponds. You have the second largest aquifer, freshwater aquifer. That all indicates something that really needs to be considered whenever you're doing development. And, you have, state laws too. Working with, the Mass Department of Environmental Protection is something that would be very important, as well as Department of Conservation and Recreation, particularly if you have something that the community thinks would be a good thing, but yet it's in what would consider to be a fragile ecological area, then you need to have that conversation early on and with frequency, because then it's going to be a matter of trying to get, some movement in a direction that if there can be compromise to allow, a certain amount of development, then let's see how we do that. And what would you have to do or allow the developer to do to make that happen? But, certainly no one is going to advocate that we just, not abide by the standards and the laws that have been put in place to protect certain places. But there are many things in the toolkit nowadays for developers to do to actually make improvements and to actually perhaps even protect areas even better than they have done in the past. And I think that would be a way of showing both an openness and also a expectation with developers that, it's a give and take. And also sometimes it might mean the development can't be as big because we want to protect an area but yet we want to welcome them, with a smaller development proposal. So, but planning boards are really instrumental in that. Your conservation and recreation people are important. I do understand that with this record number of housing permits that are taking place in this town, that is a tall order for any economic development or building or land management department to handle. And just the number of requirements that a standard permit would have, in the past they didn't have so many things. I was talking with Lee about that. Nowadays there are many requirements, and so you actually need people within that department to go out and inspect these large scale projects, not just for construction anymore, but are they meeting the requirements that the planning board have put down that are specific to this particular permit? And so I do understand too that the town takes that very seriously and has a whole inspector, division that's geared towards that. And I found that unique, but I found it to be unique in a good way because it shows the town is committed to wanting to make those improvements in a way that also sustains the environment that's around it.
Great. Board questions at this point with the economic development. Charlie. Oh, you're muted. Ready?
Okay, sorry about that. Like I said, I'm the new guy. Getting back to that last statement about the permitting process. One thing we have a problem is, and the complaints that I've heard and other board members have too, is the permitting process. It's confusing. It takes a long time. People they come and they got to jump through hoops to get projects done. That's something that we have to do a much better job. How would you accomplish that as the town manager?
Sure. I know in 2 communities I've launched online permitting for this very reason. I think the more complex that a project gets, the more that it's imperative to have easy access and timely sharing of information from one department to another, because we know when we have these large scale economic development projects, they touch a number of areas that are going to be important for communication and coordination. In the community that I currently am at, we have what we call tech review, in which we have all of the major players that would fundamentally be reviewing a plan at any stage later in the process. We have them do that very early in the process to meet with developers, to look at the scale, to look at concerns early on, so that they understand what these department heads with their professional expertise would be looking at. It may be the police chief or the fire chief that wants to talk about the things that are going to be important to them related to the development. And, whether it's public safety and traffic flow, or whether it's accessing a building in a huge development project with a fire truck and being able to turn around an apparatus and fight a potential large fire that could break out in a major distribution warehouse that's 300,000 square feet. Those things are going to be important for people to actually come together. So we have a tech review, which is very, very helpful. And oftentimes developers realize early on what other things that they're going to need to have to make the project go forward. And then by the time it gets to the planning board, or let's just say it's a special unique circumstance that would have to go before a zoning board, what it means is that the developer is ready to actually really present. And so it minimizes or cuts down on the numerous excessive type of visits before a board because, you know, they're meeting the requirements and they're being shepherded by some of the professionals. And then, of course, the board gets the benefit of having a much more advanced proposal before them, rather than sending them back to the drawing board over and over again. But online permitting, tech review components, I don't know. I said I did research, but I don't know everything about the way the department works. But I'm sure they have some measures in place to try to help address that. But that's how I would try to see, first of all, how it is and where are the log jams. I am a process improvement person, so I do like to look at the process and say, okay, maybe if we put this kind of resource here, or we reverse the way something is done, will it actually make improvements? But you can't do that until you have the dialogue with the department and understand the true process.
Well, that's one process that we have to improve on, so
Okay.
thank you.
I'm putting it down.
Eddie?
Yes, Jen, thank you for joining us. A question, I know that you said you worked with Chamber of Commerce with your economic development. Have you ever worked with a community that had both the Chamber of Commerce and a business improvement development organization?
I have, but not in my community that I represented. So I do and am aware of how development commissions typically work. However, some are much more successful when I say that, and some are not as successful as a Chamber of Commerce might be. An area Chamber of Commerce is looking at a large regional area, but the town of Plymouth is so large, I can only imagine, not having attended, that it should be a primary focus for the Chamber of Commerce. But, you know, in a community that has a development commission or a foundation, you would also want to see where there's overlap and where there is potential sharing of both vision and priority project making, so that you have the ability to have the town have that voice. Is there something in particular, Betty, that you think is not working good in the town of Plymouth right now between those kinds of organizations? I just ask because
That's a loaded question for me, so.
Okay. Okay.
But you know, one of the things that, the way I look at it is that we are America's hometown, and I want us to lead and not follow. So, and that's important, I think, for the town as a whole in every aspect of everything that they do. Now, I've had conversations with business owners that they do go and look at best practices in different communities. I know Hyannis has a pretty lively business improvement development, and you know, some of the other communities around here. So I'm just wondering, is it Plymouth doesn't have one? I think some of the businesses are looking to have one. So, I mean, it doesn't matter to me as long as we can, you know, make everything for our businesses successful. And I'm not saying that it has to be one or the other. I'm more wondering if putting them both together to have both would be successful for this town. I think there's a lot of things that, you know, we leave behind. Like I said, the big thing for me is, you know, best practices, benchmarking, and taking a look at those kinds of things, because I'm from the nuclear industry, so that's how we always did business. So for Plymouth, I want the best of the best for us moving forward.
Can I just follow up quickly, Bernie? I appreciate your, you know, extending that conversation. It gives me a better idea of what you were sort of striving to have me answer. I was answering it more from if there was a development commission that the town actually was spearheading. And I don't have that in the town of Oxford, but I do have a business association that works closely with the town, and actually on several projects, particularly for downtown and business owners, has been closely linked. So I think that's important to have, particularly with the amount of businesses that you have downtown. And if you don't, it's something definitely should be explored.
Harry?
Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer. This might be a little bit off the track of commercial development or economic development, but you did talk about residential development and developers. So I'd like to know your thoughts on the use of by developers of the 40B to I don't want to say bypass, but to basically those niceties that you mentioned of cooperation with developers are not necessarily totally the past history of Plymouth. So I'd like you to talk about 40B as it relates to residential development, and also your thoughts on affordable housing. I know it's a little bit off the track of economic development.
I think it's actually spot on, and I appreciate it, Selectman Helm. 40B is something that, particularly for fast-growing residential communities with a lot of open space, it is oftentimes been used more as a sledgehammer to force communities into potentially large developments that they're not quite ready for. One of the things that I think most even lawmakers didn't anticipate years ago is when 40B was passed. Everybody supports the need for affordable housing. And I guarantee you that every one of you as elected officials in the town of Plymouth want the next generation to be able to live and grow up and raise their families there. Having said that, affordableness of housing is absolutely necessary when it becomes a high demand area. You have to start thinking, where is your workforce going to live? If you have a very service, hospitality industry, you can just look down to the Cape where there is no housing for the people to work in the places that everyone wants to vacation to. And I think for here, 40B, has been recognized as oftentimes not really understanding the perspective of the local municipality. Having said that, there are some tools that were originally put out for municipalities to take advantage of when they needed to say, time out, we're not ready for this, we can't handle this type of growth, our school district can't handle it, our infrastructure can't handle it. And what those sort of stopgap measures were, I think many people thought they were going to be much more effective for municipalities. I am aware that this town has a GLAM provision already in place for 2 years that gave the community sort of a pause from being able to have to entertain a number of proposals at this time. But I still believe that that 10% that they put every community at is a really, really tall order. So one of the things that I have identified, because we're going through this in the town of Oxford as well, we have 3 proposals that are being put before us. I would dare say that every municipality across the Commonwealth who has open space and has a certain amount of infrastructure, get ready to buckle down, because the federal government is making an enormous amount of money available for developers who are interested in doing affordable housing. What that means is that you will have many people knocking at the door to try to actually get their project done as quickly as possible to take advantage of that those federal dollars. One of the things that this town, continues to want to try to do, and I think you've got, that coming from your planning department, is, to continue to make the case that the town, has a number of projects that they, continue to be able to reach a GLAM score that would allow them to sort of put a hold on it. But I think it's worth having a great discussion with the area legislators, because one of the things I did discover as a municipal manager is that the state says you can qualify a large number of parcels of land to give yourself reprieve from developers if it's not buildable. So if a municipality owns a cemetery, that's considered not buildable. But if a private organization, a foundation, owns a cemetery, that is somehow considered buildable, which we know nobody is going to build on a cemetery. High pressure gas lines, we know nobody can build on a high pressure gas line by law, but yet the state doesn't allow a community to incorporate that as non-developable land. If you have APR land, agriculturally preservation restricted land, in which the state actually helps the community buy the land to prevent it from being developed into perpetuity. That, my friends, can't even be considered as part of the overall scoring of space that can never be developed. So if those can't be considered into a score, what other things are they not including? So that puts the communities at a severe disadvantage. It's like saying, if you can come up with a perfect score, but by the way, all of these places we know you can't develop on, we're not going to allow you to include in that score. That's terrible for communities. It puts us on a non-level playing field. So I would love, and already have had discussions long before I got here, with the chairman of the housing committee at the State House. And I would love to have discussions with your senator and your representative about how can we perhaps put together, you know, and craft legislation that just makes it fair. Nobody thinks that's fair. I don't think it's fair. Even as a lawmaker, I wouldn't think it was fair. Don't set the community up for false pretense that they have an opportunity to stop something or have met the merit of what they require and then say, we're not going to allow you to do that. So that's an example of 40B and my knowledge of that, Harry. So I just wanted to delve into that I'm quite aware of it, and working with those kinds of developers require a lot of concerted effort on the part of the municipality and local leaders, especially the zoning board. But boards of selectmen do oftentimes get invited to look at locally initiated projects and whether they improve, but then approve, but most of it is done at the zoning board level.
All right. We're all set here. Let's move on to personnel management. Just, you know, if you could briefly talk to us about the manner in which you motivate employees and hold them accountable.
Well, one of the things that I would say is that I delight in being able to share the accomplishments of the people who work every day in town hall and across all the different municipal buildings. One of the things that I have really strived very hard to do, even during the pandemic, is to bring a sense of oneness to the community. And the way that you do that with employees is you make sure you do not only recognize them, but you provide shared opportunities for, you know, people to see one another. You know, it isn't just about having department heads come to department head meetings. It's also about meeting with department heads in a way that allows them to feel, you know, that you care about things that are important to them in their work life. I have not only sponsored, but have made it a point to hold staff appreciation days and picnics. We have had, right before the pandemic, had two very wildly popular with a very high attendance of all employees and their spouses, you know, for a holiday gathering that never existed before. Looking at how do you inspire the workforce, we give recognition to all new employees. I have announcement dates where we get together and we have, you know, ice cream social where, you know, these department heads from other places get to meet, you know, in a staggered way, new employees, because some employees eventually going to have to communicate with people outside their department. And so we recognize that. We give, you know, employee, outstanding employee of the year awards now. We never did do that. We recognize how hard people do work and make sure that we give that acclaim. I would say as manager, I've incorporated that into the budget process. I do and have looked at the manager's budget for this year, and I do see that in the area of recognition and the like, it was about $750. I would want to, as manager, be somebody who would make improvements in that area, and not just for large scale things. It's also about, you know, having those opportunities when a department is doing an incredible job or just had, you know, a very difficult situation that they had to go through that might have been very challenging. That's when you need to step in and be there and break bread with people and make them feel supported. But the biggest way that I find that all of that enhanced support works as a manager is by giving people the credit that they so justly deserve when they work together as a team. That is really the way that I operate. You can look at my meetings, and when I give my manager's report, it isn't about me, and it isn't about that moment. It's about all of the work that gets done by all of the employees to come to, bear a very important milestone. And whether it's a grant or whether it's, finishing a major project, however it's done, it's all of those things, and it's those things are done together collectively. And I really believe that. And I acknowledge the employees for that. And I have had employees who worked for the town that I currently am in that had left the community before I came and came back in a different higher level capacity. I was able to attract them back for a particular role. And they will tell you it's like night and day. The difference between a really good manager that understands how to support personnel should be one in which it's considered to be a primary focus, because that's why they call you a manager. You're managing personnel. I do know that I have been given a lot of feedback by people that it has been an extraordinary change, and people feel very well supported.
What's your approach to your experience in collective bargaining?
Oh, that's a great question. So I have a unique background in the sense that I've been on both sides of a negotiating table. I have been somebody who had risen to one of the higher levels in a statewide nurses union years ago, because one of the things I did do for a number of years was I was a step down orthopedic trauma nurse and a public health nurse. But before I ever went into public office, I had an opportunity to be elected into a state board that advocated for major policy and government policy legislative initiatives that would help protect nurses who work throughout the Commonwealth. I've also been in an organization, hospital-based organization, where I'd have done, labor management meetings, advocating for the important positions of people working at a bedside. Having said that, after being on a school board, I also was the first person on a school board to advocate for doing interest-based bargaining, and got the contracts, which had typically taken a long time to be approved, and usually would go into the next fiscal year with memorandums that still weren't articulated or approved. Doing interest-based bargaining led to a really great opportunity for training of school administrators and school officials, and we got a record set for the quickest contract by bringing mutual concerns to the table. As a manager, I have negotiated a number of contracts, both police, fire. I do not have a unionized DPW, but I was going to say that everywhere I've gone, dispatchers, professional employees, those kinds of things. I find that my approach to collective bargaining is one in which, when you show up at the table, there has to be mutual trust on both sides. You can get so much done, and you can move and advance the interests of which is important for both sides, to validate what the major concerns are for language changes in the working conditions that people have, and also validating and finding ways to meet what the current markets are for remunerating people. And if you have trust from the moment you walk in that door, you have an ability to not have any obstacle. I have never had an obstacle in all of the years that I've done collective bargaining, and that stands true to the number of contracts that I've already just recently been able to negotiate.
Okay, great, thank you. Shifting gears, we're getting near the end here of our time.
Okay. Sure.
So when the board brought us on as to help with this search, we had the opportunity to speak with all the board members, and a constant theme that came through from all the board members was the necessity of a town manager who will work to improve communications with residents and improve services to residents. It was one of the highlights of their criteria of what in choosing a town manager. Can you tell us how you would go about doing that, and how you would become a member of the, effectively a member of the community?
So there are a lot of ways to be a member of the community. Sometimes it means that you're actively out, having coffee at a local coffee shop with people to, not only introduce yourself, but to be a regular thriving, member of the community. Sometimes it's about doing very conscientious things. So when I came in as manager, I noticed that we had a number of parking spaces that were up close to the building. They were always filled up with employees. And so we started a customer service initiative in which all of the first lanes of the parking lot would be saved and left open for actual residents to come in and do business. And it's sometimes those small things that mean you're outreaching to the public that means a lot to them. Looking at the towns that I've served in, I've launched newsletters that come with information from the manager's perspective. What I mean by that is management perspective, not the manager. So we have, wonderful opportunities to share with the public the important things that go on in a department. And oftentimes I find department heads just are so humble and they take it for granted that everyone knows what goes into defining a tax rate, from an assessor's point of view, or how the process works when you're talking about, collections for outstanding dog licenses and how to get people to understand the process of, filing once they've changed a car and they need a new plate and they need the new registration and all of that kind of stuff. So I find that if we do newsletters, we have launched a very serious campaign for social media that is really very much directional to get information out to the public without overloading them, looking at the importance of prioritizing what those messages are. We had a board in front of our town hall that was from the 1940s, in which to get a message out to the public, which typically that was the only way to do it for a number of years, we had to send out the, our chief maintenance person with letters on the marquee board, which were all different sizes, and it would be kind of comical when you would see it, but that was the one message, or maybe squeezed out two messages in the most abbreviated terms. That was a way that the town was using, leverage on a visual type of thing that was out in front of the town hall. Through both a grant effort and the design efforts to make it a very historically appropriate, beautiful, high resolution sign that could be changed electronically. We now have something that represents the beautifulness of the building with the steep replicas of a slate roof and with the ironworks and all of that, so that now we have a quick way to correspond with the public. So through social media, through direct visual outreach, through newsletters, I've totally revamped the way that we actually had all our town meeting documents, Bernie, because people needed to understand what they were going to do at town meeting. And when we have open meetings, so that's a little bit different too. We have a representative town meeting government, so you would want people to come prepared. Oftentimes an open town meeting, sometimes it's the first time anybody ever came. And so you want to give them the crash course, but in a way that's meaningful to them. So we've done all of those things in taking some very archaic types of communications and changed them.
Okay. In terms of, again, we're running out of time here, but in terms of your, would you become a resident of the town if you were appointed town manager?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was visiting with my husband this past weekend, and, let's put it this way, if I had become the assistant town manager several years ago, there would have been no reason why I would have left. There's nothing, no reason. I'd like to be like Chief Bradley, but I won't be able to spend 40 years here like he has before he retires. But I certainly would have no hesitation to move here.
And what does your relationship look like with the select board if you were appointed? That's our final question. So talk to us just how you envision working with the select board.
Well, I think the first thing would be sitting down with each board member to find out what is their preferred communication style and frequency. I obviously would love to work with a board that understands that it's got this wonderful collective role to try to move the community forward. And, you know, I would want to make sure that each selectman feels, you know, at different time periods, they have the ability to speak with me all the time, access me to perhaps, you know, inform me of things that are important, but make sure that also that the overall direction of the board is, you know, being, you know, well positioned and well thought of. I would work very closely with the chairman. I mean, that is what a manager should be doing. And the chairman is working very closely with the individual board members. But having said that, it should be a cooperative, dynamic relationship. It should be one that's open and flexible. And I think finally, it should be one that works in concert with the chairman of the board to help provide both the board the direction, but the manager with also specific directions. Goals and objectives from a board are extremely important. It helps set the tone, set the expectations, and I would love to do that with this board.
Great. Board questions of things I've missed. Okay, Harry?
Thanks, Bernie. A couple questions, Jennifer. The next town manager will, hopefully, it's going to spring town meeting, have a climate sustainability coordinator to hire that will be reporting to the town manager. How would you utilize, supervise, you know, work with a climate sustainability coordinator?
Well, first of all, I would look at what the job description is, and that should be the, you know, setting of the goalposts of what you're going to be expecting from this position. I can only imagine that once working with the human resource director and refining that, and working with the departments that have been wanting to have a climate sustainability coordinator, that would glean the most essential pieces that are perhaps missing in the way that the townspeople are hoping to, you know, look at how the community can address climate change and also address the aspects of environmental impact that's taking place. So I think first you have a very clear, you know, job description. Second, you meet with the departments and the staff that are most vested in this and that want to see this happen and this position move forward. And then what you would do is, you know, set the expectations of what are some of the goals and objectives that the position will have from the very beginning. And then, you know, have check-ins with that person to see how things are moving and get updates and make them a viable component of what I imagine probably will be under the planning, development and conservation area, but I could be wrong. But that area is where I would start, and that's how you would go forward. I am very familiar, just Harry, so you know, that with you know, development of hazard mitigation plans and municipal vulnerability planning, and those are essential in every community, whether you have a coastline, a lot of ponds, infrastructure, dams, rivers. So I feel very up to speed on those kinds of things, but this position would be one in which I would want to give feedback as well to the board on what their expectations may be for this position.
Thanks. One other question. You did not put your name in for the original search group that went to the committee. You recently did. Can you explain to us why you did not originally put your name in for this position?
Actually, I can. I actually had been very interested in it and had dialogued in advance that I was interested in actually putting my name forward. I have had an event that has taken place in my life with a sibling right around the time that the application was due. in which I learned that I had a sibling who has a very advanced form of cancer. And so, needless to say, at that time, family was first for me, and that is the only reason that didn't take place. But the interest was there, it was expressed, and then, like anything, you know, fate had strange way of interacting. And so that has come to a more stable level, but not to say that that wasn't something that was completely not expected and very difficult to focus on. So that is the only reason, Selectman Helm.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Mhm.
Dick, did you have a question?
Yeah, as you may realize, if you were chosen, the position of the assistant town manager is empty. And according to our charter, unless it's really changed, it will be your appointment,
Mhm.
or whoever's appointment. Are you looking for somebody with finance or procurement or labor relations? And you can't say all of them. It's one of the key qualities that, you know, that you'd be looking for in your assistant.
Sure, to tell you honestly, Mr. Chairman, I think the first thing that I would want to do is really glean from department heads and staff, what did they think was missing, you know, from the position that was, you know, was previously filled. How could I make improvements to help make that position even more effective? Because again, it's not just about being the right hand of the manager. The manager's right hand is being supported by a whole number of people other than the assistant town manager. So I would want to find out what was working and what wasn't working. I'm not saying there wasn't anything working, because I really don't know that for a fact, but I would want to find out for myself what would be the most important qualities. Like I said, it may not have a lot to do with finances, but it may have much more to do with employee and staff personnel and other skills with regards to project management and coordination. It could be communications with you know, residents on a regular basis, because I know my office has a great deal of that as well. So I would want to find out what that is and get the best complement and make sure that it's going to fit the needs of the community. And that I would do as a, you know, a top priority.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernie.
Mhm.
Okay, I think we're out of time here, Jen, but
Okay.
if you have any closing comments, we'll let you do that, and then we'll.
Sure. I just want to say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to meet with you again. I want to impress to you that it certainly would be a distinct honor and privilege to serve the great, beautiful community of Plymouth, which by every account is definitely America's hometown. And again, I know this is not an easy decision for you. I hope that you find that my skill set is the right blend, and the types of background that I have might prove to be well suited for the community. I do want to say to you, I wish you the very best in making this decision. I know it's not an easy one, but I know that the townspeople will be in good hands once you make that decision. And I know that the employees, I'm sure through this transition, will be looking forward to it as well. So congratulations on getting to this step, and thank you again. And I look forward to hearing from the board and having the opportunity to work with you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I will depart now. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Chris, you there?
Yes, sir.
Board ready to move? Last interview?
Yes.
Harry?
I would just like to request a 5-minute break, please.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so you're back in 5.
7:05, okay?
Thank you.
Okay.